Welcome back to another episode of 5 Fact Friday, where we share 5 fun facts about a specific whiskey or wine topic, and hopefully you're going to learn something. Let's go. So today we are talking about wine, specifically the wine-making process, and just a couple of interesting facts that you might not have known about the wine-making process. Now, if you're someone who has looked into wine a little bit, you probably know a couple of these at least. This is more for my green, novice wine drinkers, but there still might be something interesting, so stick around to the end or just go check out the caption where I have the timestamps. Starting with the first thing, there are multiple types of grapes. Now, I'm not just talking about a specific Sauvignon Blanc or Riesling or Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon. Those are going to be about as nitty-gritty as you can get, and you can obviously go per region, but there's going to be a different category we're looking at. So we know grape is a crop. Wine grapes are just a crop, and just like other crops, say for example grains, there's going to be a family right below grains before you get to the extremely technical versions. So for grains you have grain, and then you have wheat, barley, rye, corn, whatever. Just like that you have grapes, and then you're going to have a couple of different families of grapes or the vines that are going to have better luck producing grapes within specific regions, just because they have specific resiliences to a lot of different things, whether that's going to be to the weather or it's going to be to just certain pests or something like that. I would try to pronounce the names of these, but I'll put them on the screen over here because I'm gonna slaughter them. I know it. I've been struggling to pronounce them all week. It's just a struggle bus this week, man. But just like these other crops, you have this middle category that is going to be an overarching above these other types of grapes. So when you get down to your Sauvignon Blanc or your Riesling or your Cabernet Sauvignon, they're going to have a family right above them, and then that's going to go up to grape. And again, each of these are going to survive better in certain climates, certain areas, because they're more resilient to certain pests, things like that. And you can even take them, graft them together, and make hybrids to make this a little bit more resilient, again, to more things that might be in that area. Specific example of this is over in Europe. A long time ago, there was a really bad plight that was going on, and there was some fungus, or excuse me, not fungus, some pests that were eating away at some crops. So they realized if they take an American branch of this, the wine branches, wine vines, and graft that over to the European style, they could make it a little bit more resilient to it, so you could actually save your crops. There was a lot that went on with that, but just an example. Jumping over to number 2, wines are going to be temperature dependent. So if you have a wine that is going to be a little bit more robust, lower acidity, and more full-bodied, and usually a little bit more fruit-forward flavor, these ripe fruits, that is typically going to be a warm weather grape. And when I'm talking about warm weather areas, I'm talking places like California, New Mexico, Australia, or even just going down into the southern European regions. Those are going to be warm weather grapes. These grapes thrive there, they like the sun, they like the heat, and those can grow very well, producing a good wine. Now, if you took that same vine and you stuck it somewhere a little bit cooler, where there might be less sunlight, less heat, more rain, it's not going to perform quite as well. You're not going to get the same quality of wine. Now, same goes for the flip side of that when you're in a cooler region and you have a cooler weather grape. These are going to be grapes that are going to give you more of a higher acidity flavor. It's not going to be quite as tannic as some of these warm weather grapes, and it's also going to be a little bit more light-bodied. For these, think of Washington, Oregon, or the northern European regions. Those are going to be your cooler weather grapes. And again, if you took a cooler weather grape and you stuck it in a warm climate, it's not going to perform as well, and that wine is not going to turn out as good. Jumping over to number 3, right after you have grown your grapes, it's time to harvest it. So just like any crop, there's going to be a window that you need to harvest your grapes in if you want to get a good wine. Same goes for any other crop, there are specific windows. But with wine, it's a little interesting. You obviously don't want to be early. It's best if you are right on the money and you are within that window. However, there are going to be some wines that you actually want to harvest a little bit later. Those late harvest wines are just going to give the wine a different flavor, and you're also usually going to get a little bit more sweetness out of these because of all of the sugar just condensing a little bit more in the grapes as it sits on the vine. The main 3 that I want to talk about real quick are going to be just a basic late harvest wine, an ice wine, and then a noble rot wine, which is very interesting. So if you didn't pick it right away and you waited a little bit, you're going to end up with a late harvest. This is going to be when those grapes start to shrivel up a little bit and it's going to allow the sugars, again, to be a little bit more concentrated, which is going to give you typically more residual sugar left over, as well as usually a little bit of a higher alcohol content. From there, you're going to move over to ice wines, which is what happens when you let the grapes actually freeze on the vine and you harvest it while they're frozen. Again, taking that grape, letting it sit on the vine so it shrivels up, letting it freeze, you're going to get even higher concentration of those sugars since all the other juices are frozen. Sugars are going to be pulled out a little bit more. They're going to just be in there. It's getting pulled up from the roots and everything. That is going to be a very sweet wine again, and also have a little bit of a higher alcohol content and a different flavor to it. Now, the last one I want to talk about is noble rot, which is actually going to be when you allow a fungus to settle in on the grape and the vine. This is going to give you a little bit more of a honey dried fruit flavor, and that's from this fungus here. Again, not going to try to pronounce it. My pronunciations have just been awful this week, so I'm not going to try. Here it is. This fungus is not going to harm the wine at all. It's just going to give it a little bit more of a honey dried fruit flavor rather than just the base flavor that you'd be getting from the grape. So again, depending on what time you harvest this is going to dictate how this wine is going to turn out. From there, we jump over to number 4, where we are talking about the maceration and going to be jumping into the fermentation for number 5. So when you are macerating or crushing up the grapes and getting the juice out of them, that is where you can make the decision whether you're going to have a red wine, a rosé, or a white wine. This is because the color of the wine actually comes from leaving that skin contact of the grape and the seeds, letting it just soak in with all of the juices. That's when you're going to get your color. So if I take a red wine grape and we destem it, clean it up, crush it all up, and then I take the skins and seeds away right away, you're going to end up with a white wine from that red wine grape. Now, this isn't done super frequently just because it's easier and more desirable, or just more customary, I guess, to make these red wines with these red wine grapes. So depending on which direction you want to go, right after you crush up the grapes, if you remove all the skins, you go with a white wine. If you leave it, you're going to go with either a rosé or a red wine. Now, jumping over to our final one about fermentation. This one I found to be very interesting because, like any alcoholic beverage, you have to have fermentation. Fermentation just is when you are allowing the alcohol to actually develop from the yeast going and eating the sugar, and then you have that byproduct of the alcohol. For most things that I've come across for like whiskeys or some other beverages, these are going to be short fermentation periods, usually about 3 to maybe 7 days. But in the world of wine, you're looking at about 14 days to almost 50 for some wines. The fermentation period can shift around a little bit depending on the grape, the region, the type of yeast, all of these little things, and all of these decisions that the winemaker can decide on. Once this has finished fermenting, usually it's going to be allowed to age for some amount of time. Sometimes it's bottled right away, but wine, depending on what it is, can age for a very long time. Typically, you're not going to age a wine in like an oak barrel for an excessively long time. It's usually going to be in an oak barrel or in a stainless steel tank, or historically in a stone container. Then it goes into its bottled vessel, and it's allowed to age in that bottle for a longer period of time. Having a wine that can age is going to depend on a lot of characteristics about the wine. You'll also see some wines that are secondary aged in, say, a ex-beer barrel or a ex-whiskey barrel, just to give it a little bit of an extra flavor. But again, that's not something that's fully necessary. It's just something to impart some extra flavor into the wine. One of the ones that you'll see pretty commonly done, though, for an age is going to be an oaked Chardonnay. So you take a Chardonnay, you put it in an oak barrel. It's going to give it that buttery, popcorny kind of flavor that a lot of people associate with Chardonnay, although that's not the grape itself. That's going to be coming from the oak. The world of wine and winemaking is extremely diverse, and you can get super nerdy and nitty-gritty with it. Depending on where you're planting your grapes, what grapes you're planting, when you're harvesting, all of these decisions down to exactly when are you bottling it, how long are you letting it age for, all of these decisions made by the winemaker are going to dictate how that wine comes out. I hope this little sprinkling of knowledge was enough just to whet your palate, to make you a little bit more thirsty to go dive deeper into the world of wine and winemaking, because it's fun and it can get super nerdy. But as always, I hope you guys have a great weekend. Cheers, and we'll see you on Monday.